He had a folder. He had a spreadsheet. He had the name of an attorney printed on a business card he kept sliding across my kitchen table like it was a weapon. My brother sat across from me with the same expression he'd worn our whole lives, the one that said he already knew how everything was going to end. He folded his hands. He smiled just barely. And he said, "Sign this and we both walk away clean." I looked at the paper. I looked at him. And I thought about a phone call I made 3 years ago at 2 in the morning, standing in a hospital hallway with my shoes still on from work and my hands shaking so badly I had to dial twice. I didn't sign anything. My husband and I met in college at a library where we were both pretending to study for the same exam. He borrowed my highlighter and never gave it back. 11 years later, I still brought it up sometimes, and he still laughed like it was the funniest thing anyone had ever said. We got married at 26, had our daughter Emma at 29, and by the time I was 32, we had built something that felt genuinely, solidly good. He taught high school history. I worked as a nurse in a cardiac unit. We weren't rich, but we were stable. We had a small house with a yard Emma liked to run in circles around for reasons she never explained. We had a dog named Fig. We had a savings account with just over $19,000 in it that we were planning to use for a kitchen renovation. We kept pushing back because something always came up. Something always comes up. I know that now, in a way I didn't then. It was a Tuesday in September when my husband came home from work and said his head hurt. He'd been having headaches for a few weeks. I told him to drink more water. He was a teacher. He spent 8 hours a day in a room full of teenagers who didn't open windows. I thought it was sinus pressure. I thought it was stress. I thought a lot of things that I was wrong about. That Friday, he collapsed in the kitchen. He was conscious when the ambulance came. He was confused and he kept asking where Fig was, and Fig was right there, sitting next to him with his head on my husband's chest like he understood something I didn't yet. I rode with him. I called my mother from the back of the ambulance. She answered on the third ring. "He collapsed," I said. "We're on the way to St. Michael's." She said, "Oh no, keep us posted. Keep us posted." Like I'd told her about a flight delay. The ER ran tests. Then they ran more. A neurologist I'd never met pulled me into a small room with a whiteboard that still had someone else's diagram on it, and she used words I knew clinically and had never expected to hear applied to my husband. Mass, posterior fossa, surgical intervention. The kind of thing where time matters and waiting makes it worse. She said they needed to operate within 72 hours. She said the surgery itself would cost before insurance, before anything, roughly $32,000 in upfront deposits and surgical fees, because my husband had changed jobs that spring, and we were in a coverage gap we hadn't fully understood until that moment. She said there were financing options. She said they could connect me with a patient advocate. She said all the right things in the gentlest possible voice, and I heard almost none of it because I was doing math in my head, and the math wasn't working. 19,000 in savings, 32,000 needed. That gap, $13,000, felt like a canyon. I called my mother again from the waiting room. It was almost 9 o'clock at night. She picked up on the first ring this time, which I remember noticing. "Mom," I said, "it's serious. He needs brain surgery. I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me." She said, "Of course." I told her about the money. I told her the number. I told her we had 19 and needed 13 more. That I would pay it back. That I would sign something. That I would do whatever she needed. I was not too proud to beg. I want to be clear about that. I begged. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Honey, we're in Rome." I knew they were in Rome. My parents had been planning their 30th anniversary trip to Italy for 2 years. My mother had a spreadsheet which now seems like something worth noting, with every museum, every restaurant, every walking tour mapped out by neighborhood. They had been gone for 4 days. They had 13 days left. "I know," I said. "I know you're in Rome. I'm asking if you can wire us the money. You don't have to come home." Another silence. Then I heard my father's voice in the background, low, asking something. My mother's response was muffled, like she'd covered the phone. She came back and said, "We'd have to look at what we have accessible over here. The accounts are, it's complicated with the international transfers, and we already put so much into this trip." "Mom," I said, "he might die." She said she understood that. She said it in the same voice she used when I told her Emma had an ear infection. The call ended with her saying she would talk to my father and call me back. She called back 40 minutes later. It was my father this time. He said they were very sorry this was happening. He said they wished they could do more. He said the timing was, and he actually used this word, unfortunate. He said they had about 8,000 in an account they could theoretically access, but that pulling it would affect some investment arrangement he'd set up for the trip, and he wasn't sure the bank could process an international Paris wire that size overnight. He said he'd look into it in the morning. In the morning. My husband was in a hospital bed with a mass in his head, and my father was going to look into it in the morning. I hung up. I sat in that waiting room chair, and I stared at the vending machine across the hall for a long time. Then I called my brother. He's 3 years older than me. He lived 40 minutes away. He was not in Rome. He was sitting in his house where he'd lived for 6 years, which our parents helped him buy, which I had never once resented until that exact moment. He answered, and I told him everything, and before I could finish, he said, "You can't ask them to cut their trip short. They've been planning this for years." I said I wasn't asking them to come home. I was asking for a wire transfer. He said, "They put everything into this trip, Sarah. You know how much they spent." I said I knew how much my husband's surgery cost. He said, "I hear you. But this feels like a you and Marcus problem. Have you tried the hospital's financial assistance program?" A you and Marcus problem. My husband, who had come to every single one of my brother's terrible dinner parties. My husband, who helped him move twice and paint his living room and fix a leak under his bathroom sink the August before Emma was born. A you and Marcus problem. I said, "Can you help? Can you give us anything?" He said he was stretched thin right now. He said he was sorry. He said to keep him updated. That phrase again. Keep us updated. Like I was a news bulletin. Like I was a situation to be monitored from a safe distance. I sat with the phone in my lap for a while after that. Then I called my mother-in-law. She answered before the second ring even finished. She is 61 years old, and she has a laugh that takes up an entire room, and she once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring us soup when Emma had RSV. I had called her after I called my own mother and my own brother, and that fact still sits inside me like a stone. I told her what I'd told everyone else. She said, "How much do you need?" Just like that. No pause, no qualifications. "How much do you need?" I said 13,000. Maybe a little more depending on the anesthesiologist's billing. She said, "I'm going to call your father-in-law right now, and I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. She called back in 8. She said they could wire 15,000 by morning. She said it was done. She said she and my father-in-law were driving up first thing and would stay as long as we needed. She said, "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" Nobody had asked me that yet. I cried then. Right there in the waiting room, in the chair across from the vending machine, with a woman 2 seats down pretending not to notice. I cried because someone had finally asked, and because it had not been my mother. My in-laws arrived at 6:30 the next morning. My mother-in-law brought a bag of food, actual food, not vending machine food, and my father-in-law sat with me through the pre-op paperwork and helped me understand what I was signing. He'd had a knee replacement a few years back and navigated his own surgical billing situation, and he walked me through it calmly, page by page. My parents called at 9 that morning, Rome time, which was 3 in the morning for us. I was in the surgical waiting room. The call woke me up from the first 20 minutes of sleep I'd gotten in 36 hours. My mother said they'd looked into the wire transfer, and it was going to take 3 to 5 business days because of some international processing issue. She wanted to know if that would work. The surgery was already in progress. I said, "My in-laws covered it." She said, "Oh, good. See? It worked out." I hung up. I didn't say anything else. I just pressed the red button and turned the phone face down on the seat next to me. My husband survived the surgery. The tumor was removed completely. Recovery was long. There were weeks of rehabilitation, follow-up scans, the particular exhaustion of watching someone you love relearn certain words and certain movements, but he got there. He is here. He is in the next room right now and I can hear him helping Emma with homework, and every single time I hear that I think about the version of this where things went differently and I have to stop thinking about it. In the weeks after the surgery, my mother texted updates about Italy. She sent photos of the Pantheon and a small pasta dish she'd had near the Vatican. She said they were praying for Marcus's recovery. I did not respond to these messages. I did not call. When they returned from their trip and called me, I let it go to voicemail. When my brother texted asking why I was being so cold, I let that go too. I wasn't ready to have the conversation. I wasn't ready to hear the explanations. I knew what the explanations would sound like: the international banking complications, the investment timing, the trip they'd planned for 2 years. And I knew none of those explanations would make me feel any differently about the fact that my in-laws, people who share no blood with me, wired money without hesitation, while my own parents went back to their hotel and went to sleep. Eventually my mother stopped calling as often, then less than that. Then the communication became Christmas cards and obligatory birthday texts that I replied to briefly and without warmth. My brother told me at some point that I was being dramatic. He said I needed to extend grace. He said nobody's perfect and family is family. Family is family. I thought about that phrase a lot. I still do. Emma was 4 when my parents died. It was a car accident on a highway in Georgia, which is where my mother grew up and where they'd gone to visit her sister. I got the call from my aunt. It was fast, the doctor said, which was meant to be comforting, and was not. I grieved. I want to be honest about that. I cried in a way I hadn't expected to. There was grief there for the parents I'd had before that hospital waiting room, for the relationship I'd wanted us to have, for the fact that Emma would not know her grandparents even as the complicated people they were. I cried and I went to the funeral and I stood at the graveside in the September wind and I let myself feel all of it. Then, 6 weeks later, my brother called. He didn't lead with sympathy. He led with the folder. He told me our parents had an estate worth a little over $900,000, the house, which had appreciated significantly. Retirement accounts, life insurance, investments. He told me he was the executor. He told me they had updated their will about 2 years ago. He told me, in a voice I can only describe as carefully casual, that the updated will left the entirety of the estate to him. I asked him to repeat that. He said they had made their wishes clear, and he felt he needed to respect those wishes. He said he understood it was difficult. He said he was willing to offer me $50,000 as a gesture of goodwill if I signed a document releasing any further claims to the estate. He called it a clean resolution. I said I needed to see the will. He said he'd send me a copy. The copy arrived 2 days later. The date on the updated will was 11 months after my husband's surgery. 11 months after I stopped returning my mother's calls. The timing was not subtle. The implication was not subtle. I had pulled away from them and they had rewritten the document that determined what happened to everything they owned. I called an estate attorney. Her name was Miss Patterson, and she had an office downtown and a way of listening that made me feel like nothing I said was going to surprise her, which helped. She read the will. She asked me questions about the timeline. She asked about the 2-year gap between the original will, which had, she pointed out after I got a copy through legal channels, split the estate evenly between my brother and me, and the updated version. She asked about my relationship with my parents in that period. She asked whether I had any documentation of contact or lack of contact. I had the phone records. I had the text messages. I had the voicemails I'd never deleted, including one from my mother from about 8 months before the updated will, asking me why I was shutting her out, saying they had done the best they could, saying she didn't understand why I was punishing them. Miss Patterson said the updated will might be contestable on the grounds of undue influence, specifically, that my brother, who had remained in close contact with my parents during the estrangement, was in a position to influence their decisions regarding the estate. She said it wasn't guaranteed. She said these cases were complicated and took time. She said I needed to decide what I wanted to do. I thought about what I wanted. That sounds simple. It wasn't. Part of me wanted to sign my brother's paper and never speak to him again. Part of me was so tired of the hospital, of the recovery, of the estrangement, of the grief that the idea of a legal fight felt like more than I had in me. $50,000 wasn't nothing. I could do real things with $50,000. But I kept coming back to a number. $900,000, split evenly, would have been $450,000. Enough for Emma's education, fully funded. Enough to pay off the rest of the mortgage. Enough to build a real cushion for whatever came next, because I knew now that things come next. I knew now that the ground shifts. And I kept coming back to something else. My brother had sat in his house, 40 minutes away, while my husband was going into brain surgery, and told me it was a you and Marcus problem. And then he had spent 2 years maintaining a relationship with my parents that I had been too hurt to maintain. And now he was sitting across my kitchen table with a folder, benefiting directly from that estrangement, holding out $50,000 like it was something to be grateful for. I thought about Emma running circles in the yard. I thought about my husband helping her with homework in the next room. I thought about my mother-in-law calling back in 8 minutes. I told my brother I needed to think about it. He said he'd give me a week. I called Miss Patterson the next morning. The process took 14 months. I won't pretend it was clean or simple, or that there weren't moments where I questioned whether I had made the right choice. There were depositions. There were documents. There were days where my brother and I sat in the same room with our respective attorneys and did not look at each other. And I thought about all the years before that, the birthday dinners and the Christmases and the ordinary Tuesday phone calls, and I felt the loss of that like a specific kind of ache. But there was also evidence. Miss Patterson was thorough. There were emails between my brother and my parents from the period after my estrangement. Emails my parents had kept on a shared family account that my brother had given her access to. He didn't know, apparently, that the account included sent messages in which he described my behavior as manipulative and suggested that I had always taken more than my share of their attention and resources. In one email, sent about 7 months before the will was updated, he wrote that he thought they should reconsider what they were leaving me, given how I'd treated them. Miss Patterson said that was about as clear an example of influence as you could get. The judge agreed. The updated will was invalidated. The estate was distributed according to the original terms, split evenly, which meant that after attorney's fees and estate costs and the long particular grind of the legal process, I received just over $390,000. I paid off our mortgage. I opened an education account for Emma, with enough that she won't have to take out loans. I set aside a portion for my husband's ongoing neurological follow-ups, which are not cheap, and which I no longer have to do math about in hospital waiting rooms. I gave $15,000 to my in-laws, who refused it twice before accepting it, and my mother-in-law cried, and my father-in-law said that was not why they had done it, and I said I knew, and I gave it to them anyway. My brother and I do not speak. I don't expect that to change. I am not interested in another version of the conversation, where he explains that he was only looking out for himself, that he had a different perspective, that family is complicated. I know family is complicated. I know that better now than I ever wanted to. What I also know is this. When the worst moment of my life arrived without warning, the people who were supposed to show up looked at the situation, calculated what it would cost them, and decided they had other plans. And the people who didn't share my blood picked up the phone and said, "How much do you need?" and meant it. That's not something you unknow. That's not something you explain away or forgive yourself into forgetting. You carry it. You let it change what you understand about people, and about what you owe to whom, and about where you spend the love you have available to give. Emma is 7 now. She likes geology. She collects rocks from every place we go, and labels them with masking tape in her careful handwriting. She has her father's eyes, and a way of asking questions that catches me off guard sometimes because they're the right questions, the ones that go right to the middle of a thing. She asked me once why she doesn't have grandparents on my side like her friends do. I thought for a moment. I said, because some people, even people who love you in their own way, make choices that mean you can't stay close to them. She thought about that. She asked if I was sad about it. I told her I was. I told her that it was okay to be sad about something and still know you made the right choice. She picked up a piece of rose quartz off her windowsill. She'd gotten it from a gem fair we went to last spring, and she turned it over in her hands, the way she does when she's thinking. And she said, "Okay," and went back to whatever she'd been doing before. That was enough. For right now, that was enough. My husband is calling me from the other room. Emma is apparently very upset about a math problem and needs a second opinion, and he has declared this above his pay grade. I'm going to go help her. I'm going to sit at the kitchen table where my brother once laid out his folder and his business cards and his version of a clean resolution, and I'm going to help my daughter figure out the answer. We'll get there. We always do.